The rain tapped lightly on the tall windows of the law office, like it too was waiting for the verdict. Inside the cold, formal room, Candace Moore sat straight in her chair, though her palms were sweaty. She felt the eyes of everyone in the room on her, the same eyes that had looked down on her for years. Across from her, her stepmother Caroline sat with her legs crossed, a pearl necklace hugging her neck, her smile thin and sharp. Candace had seen that smile too many times before. Beside Caroline were her sons, Tolu and Raymond, both dressed in fine suits, laughing quietly to themselves like they already knew how this would go. The lawyer, an older man with thick glasses, cleared his throat. "This is the last will and testament of Chief Edwin Moore." Candace felt her chest tighten. Her father, the man who once held her hand through rainstorms when she was small, the same man who had grown distant after remarrying. She still remembered how quickly everything changed, how Caroline moved in and began rearranging their home and their lives. As the lawyer read out the will, her father's wealth was divided like meat at a table. The estate, the cars, the businesses, everything was going to Caroline and her sons. The room was filled with nods and quiet smiles. Candace sat still, waiting. "And to my daughter Candace Moore," the lawyer continued, pausing, "I leave this." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small white envelope. Everyone burst into laughter. Raymond leaned back and clapped. "Wahala for who no get land," he joked in pidgin. Tolu laughed louder, shaking his head. "A whole key? For what? Gatehouse?" Caroline leaned close, her voice soft and cruel. "He gave you what you deserve. Nothing." The lawyer, uncomfortable, handed the envelope to Candace. It was light. There was a small key inside, old and brass. No note, no explanation. Her throat burned. The tears were close, but she refused to cry here, not in front of them. She stood slowly, holding the key tightly in her hand. "Then we'll see what that nothing really is," she said quietly, but with a strength that made Caroline blink. No one laughed now. Candace walked out, the sound of her heels firm against the marble floor, as outside the rain began to fall harder. Candace grew up in a house where love used to live. In the early days, before her mother passed, it was full of warmth and laughter. Her mother, Amaka, was kind and graceful, a woman who spoke softly but carried strength in her eyes. She made jollof rice on Sundays and taught Candace how to pray at night. But when Amaka died in a car accident, everything changed. Candace was just 8 years old when she lost her mother. Her father, Chief Edwin Moore, was never the same after that. A well-respected businessman in Lagos, he buried himself in work. For a while, he still tried, reading her stories at night, calling her "my little lioness." He used to say, "You are braver than you believe, Candace. Don't ever forget that." She held on to those words like a lifeline. Then Caroline came. Caroline was a woman of wealth and connections. She wore imported wigs, spoke with a fake British accent, and always carried a scent of power and something bitter. She married Edwin just a year after Amaka's burial. At first, Candace tried to accept her, but Caroline had no interest in being a mother. What she wanted was control, and Candace didn't fit into her picture of a perfect society family. Soon, little things started changing. Candace's room was moved to the back of the house. Her clothes were replaced with cheaper ones. Then came the suggestion, Candace would benefit from discipline. Maybe a boarding school will do her some good. Her father agreed, too tired or too blind to see what was really happening. At 11, Candace was sent to a strict all-girls school in Ibadan. She cried the first few nights, wondering why her father didn't fight for her, why no one did. Over the years, her visits home became shorter, colder. At family parties, Caroline's sons, Tolu and Raymond, were paraded around like princes. Candace sat in the corner, forgotten. She learned to smile without showing her pain, to stay quiet while they talked over her, to swallow her questions. "Why did you forget me, Daddy?" She studied hard, earned her nursing degree, and found work in a private hospital in Abuja. Life wasn't easy, but she made her own way. She worked double shifts, skipped vacations, and rarely complained. She learned how to survive with little and how to take pride in being kind in a world that wasn't always kind back. She hadn't spoken properly to her father in over 2 years. A few cold phone calls, maybe, an occasional birthday text. Still, when the call came that he had died suddenly of a heart attack, her heart broke open like it did the day her mother died. At the funeral, she stood beside his coffin while Caroline and the boys wore designer agbadas, and greeted mourners like politicians. No one mentioned her. No one asked how she was holding up. Now, days later, standing outside that law firm with the small key in her hand, Candace felt something strange. It wasn't anger, though there was plenty of that. It wasn't sadness, though it lingered in her chest. It was something deeper, something like curiosity. This key. It wasn't just a key, it was a message. Her father had left her something, even if he couldn't say it in words. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was love, maybe it was his way of telling her she hadn't been forgotten after all. She held it up to the light. It was old, with scratches along the edges, the kind of key that belonged to something important or something hidden. Candace looked around as the Lagos sun broke through the rain clouds, casting gold onto the wet streets. People were moving, shouting, honking, living their lives. And here she was, standing still, holding a secret that might finally change everything. Her whole life, people had tried to make her small, make her quiet. But this time, she wouldn't disappear. This time, she was going to find out exactly what her father left behind and why. The small room smelled of dust and old paper. Candace sat on the floor of the storage unit, surrounded by boxes her father had hidden away from the world. Her clothes were soaked in sweat, her fingers covered in dust, but she didn't stop. Each box told a story: bank statements, letters, printed emails, and 3 journals, handwritten in her father's own careful script. As she flipped through one of the journals, her heart ached. Her father had written down everything. He had found out that Caroline and her sons were stealing from his companies, selling off assets, hiding money abroad, even forging his signature. But instead of confronting them, he quietly started documenting everything. In the last few pages of the 3rd journal, she saw the date, 2 weeks before he died. He wrote, "Candace, I know you think I forgot you, but I didn't. I stayed silent so they wouldn't come after you, but I also knew you were the only one strong enough to handle the truth. If you're reading this, they didn't win." Tears slipped down her cheeks, not just from sadness, but from something deeper. Her father hadn't hated her. He had been protecting her. All those years of distance, they had meaning. She took a shaky breath. This wasn't just a key, it was a doorway. By the next week, she found herself sitting in a quiet cafe in Ikeja with her old school friend, Nkem, a once carefree guy with dreadlocks and big dreams, who was now a serious corporate lawyer with a sharp tongue and a reputation for exposing dirty deals. "I've seen some mad things," Nkem said as he looked through the documents Candace brought. "But this one is fire. They messed with the wrong daughter." Candace smiled weakly. "I'm scared, Nkem. These people, they play dirty. You think I wear these cheap suits for fashion?" He joked. "We play smarter." They started building a case, quietly, carefully. Nkem helped her scan documents, link accounts, trace wire transfers. But it wasn't easy. Some of the papers were old, and much of the money had been moved through shell companies. Every time they thought they had something, it felt like the brothers were already 2 steps ahead. At the same time, Caroline wasn't resting. Word spread through the city that Candace was losing it. Rumors floated into church groups and social circles. People whispered that she was trying to drag her family name in the mud out of bitterness. Then her job changed. The hospital where she worked called her in suddenly. The HR manager sat stiffly, avoiding her eyes. "There's been a restructuring," she said. "Your position has been made redundant. We appreciate your years of service." Candace walked out that day with her head spinning. She knew it wasn't a coincidence. One of Caroline's cousins was on the hospital board. She went home to her small flat in Yaba and cried. Not because of the job, but because the weight of everything felt like too much. The world was spinning and she had no control. A few days later, she got a message from Ifeoma, one of her classmates from university. "Be careful, Candace. They're watching you. Someone's asking questions about where you've been going." Candace sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the message. For the first time, fear wrapped itself tightly around her chest. These weren't just people with money. They had power, influence. They could ruin her if they wanted, or worse. But then she picked up one of the journals again. Her father's voice, written in ink, calmed her. "Courage doesn't roar, it whispers. Try again tomorrow." She closed her eyes and repeated it aloud. Then she stood up, walked to the kitchen, and poured herself a glass of water. She didn't come this far to run. The next day, she met Nkem at his office. "We go hard now," she said. "No more hiding." He nodded. "Good, because I just found something. An old account under Raymond's name, linked to a company in Dubai. Guess who authorized the transfer?" Candace blinked. "My father?" "No," Nkem said. "You." "What?" He turned his laptop to show her a scanned document. There was her name, her forged signature, dated 2 years ago. "They were planning to frame you in case things went south," he said. "But we can use this." Candace felt a chill run down her spine. She imagined what would have happened if she never found the storage unit. If she hadn't followed the clue her father left behind, they could have destroyed her life, her name, everything. Caroline and the boys had built a kingdom on lies, but they made one mistake. They underestimated the girl they pushed aside. She no longer felt like the quiet, invisible daughter. She felt like someone who had fire in her bones. Candace and Nkem worked day and night, building the timeline, gathering the evidence, and preparing a statement for the court. Every time she doubted herself, she would read another journal entry. Her father had known this fight would come. He had trusted her to finish what he started. And now, she was ready. Ready to make them face the truth. Ready to make them pay. Ready to reclaim everything they tried to steal from her. Candace sat on the floor of her tiny flat in Yaba, the small key still on the table beside her. All around her were papers, files, and the old leather-bound journals her father had hidden in the dusty storage unit. It was past midnight, but sleep felt like a stranger. Her eyes were red, her heart heavy, and her thoughts kept running in circles. Everything she thought she knew was now broken. Her father had known about the fraud. He had watched as Caroline and her sons stole from his company, slowly, quietly, and without shame. He had written everything down, dates, amounts, fake signatures, even voice notes on an old recorder. And yet, he never said a word to her when he was alive. She had spent years believing he didn't care, but now she knew. He had been protecting her from the shadows. He stayed distant to keep her safe. He left her that key, not as an insult, but as the first piece of a puzzle. The truth wasn't buried in the will. It was buried in the pages of his hidden journals. She held one of them close to her chest, breathing in the smell of old paper and ink. On one of the pages, his words stared back at her. "Courage doesn't roar. It whispers. Try again tomorrow." The next morning, she called the only person she could trust, Nkem. Back in nursing school, they had been close. He was loud, always cracking jokes, the type who never let the world get him down. But now he was a sharp, well-dressed lawyer, known in Lagos for handling corruption cases with fearless skill. When he walked into the cafe in Ikeja where they agreed to meet, he was holding a suya stick in one hand and his laptop bag in the other. "Now who they chase lion, way they hide like rat," he said with a grin. "Now the Candace I remember go face these people head on." Candace didn't smile. "They'll destroy me, Nkem." He sat down. "Only if you let them." She passed him the journals and files. As he scanned through them, his smile slowly faded. This is heavy. Your papa was tracking them for years." Candace nodded, her voice low. "He died before he could stop them." Nkem leaned forward. "Then we finish what he started." That was how the fight began. They worked quietly. No loud moves, no noise. They dug deeper into hidden bank accounts, offshore companies, and fake receipts. Nkem reached out to contacts in the financial sector, and Candace typed out notes, scanned documents, and followed leads like a detective. But Caroline wasn't sleeping either. Within 2 weeks, stories about Candace started to appear in whispers. "She's bitter. She's chasing shadows." She was always jealous. People who once smiled at her in church now crossed the road when they saw her. Some even said she had cursed her father's name by digging up the past. Then came the final blow. Her hospital job, her lifeline, was taken away. They called it restructuring. But Candace knew the truth. Caroline's cousin sat on the hospital board, the same cousin who hugged her stiffly at her father's burial. Her bank account began to bleed. Rent, food, transportation. It all became too much. One evening, she walked from Nkem's office to her flat in the dark because she couldn't afford a Bolt ride. Halfway home, she got a message from an old university friend. "Be careful, they're watching you. Someone asked me where you live." She froze in the street, the wind whipping at her scarf. Her breath quickened. These people were rich and dangerous. They had power. They didn't like to lose. For a moment, she wanted to run, to forget everything, to go back to being quiet and invisible. But then she remembered her father's words. Try again tomorrow. She got home, locked every door, and cried, not from fear, but from anger, from the fire that was now burning in her bones. The next day, she called Ankem. No more hiding, she said. Let's go, full fire. Ankem didn't even flinch. You sure? Yes, let them come. That week, they found something big. An account in Raymond's name, linked to a fake real estate company in Dubai. Millions of Naira had passed through it. On one document, they found something chilling. Candace's name. They were setting you up, Ankem said. If you hadn't found these journals, they could have blamed you for everything. Candace sat still, her hands shaking. Her own family had planned to use her as a scapegoat, to ruin her, to finish her story with shame. Instead, they lit a fire. She took out her father's last journal and turned to the final page. It wasn't signed, but the writing was strong, as if he knew time was running out. If they kill my name, so be it. But they won't kill your truth, not if you're brave enough to carry it. Candace closed the journal, stood up, and straightened her shoulders. Her enemies wore fine lace and designer suits. They laughed at her pain, but they didn't understand something very simple. Candace Moore had nothing left to lose, and people with nothing to lose are the most dangerous of all. She was tired, broken, but she was not finished. The storm had come, and she was still standing. The court was packed that morning. Journalists with cameras stood by the steps, waiting like vultures. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Candace sat on the front bench beside Ankem, her face calm but her fingers trembling in her lap. She wore a plain blue dress and a jewel wrapped simply, not for show but for strength. Caroline entered the courtroom like a queen, dressed in all white lace, her face painted with calm pride. Tolu and Raymond followed behind, nodding at familiar faces in the crowd. They looked untouchable, powerful, just like their father once did. But Candace had come with fire in her chest and her father's truth in her hands. Ankem rose to speak first. Your Honor, he said with calm force, we have submitted documents that prove fraudulent transfers, shell companies, and falsified signatures, all tied to the estate of the late Chief Edwin Moore and carried out by the defendant seated here today. He laid the folders on the judge's desk. The room buzzed. Candace watched quietly, holding one of her father's journals in her bag. Her fingers touched the page where he wrote, "The truth is slow, but it always arrives." The judge began reviewing the evidence. For a moment, Candace allowed herself to breathe. Then, everything fell apart. The opposing lawyer stood. Your Honor, we object. The documents submitted are not admissible. There is no verifiable chain of custody. These could have been forged, altered, or stolen. We ask that the evidence be rejected. The judge looked down at the papers. Is this true, Mr. Ankem? Ankem blinked. Your Honor, we can explain. Do you or do you not have certified custody records for these files? Ankem hesitated. No, Your Honor, but we... Then they are inadmissible, the judge said. The court will not proceed with speculation. Candace's heart dropped into her stomach. She looked at Ankem. His face had changed. He wasn't sweating, but he wasn't fighting either. Something was wrong. Later, outside the courtroom, Candace faced a storm of flashing cameras and loud voices. Miss Moore, are you bitter over your father's inheritance? Is it true your stepmother took you in and raised you? Is this just a case of family jealousy? Candace kept walking, tears stinging her eyes. Her chest burned with betrayal. Again, Ankem didn't say a word. He walked beside her like a stranger. He hadn't even tried to defend her properly. Something had shifted and she knew he had been bought. At home, she dropped her bag on the floor and sat on the cold tile, her back against the door. Everything was gone. Her voice, her fight, her truth, it had all been silenced. She sat there for hours, not crying, just empty. Then, her phone buzzed. A message from a number she didn't recognize. It was a link, no words, just a link. Candace clicked it, and everything changed. The screen loaded a website, one of the biggest investigative blogs in Nigeria. The headline hit her like thunder. Exclusive, hidden files, expose fraud in Moore family empire. She gasped. Below were screenshots of the documents, images of Caroline's secret accounts, Raymond's real estate scams, and even voice recordings of her father's private notes. Her father's own words, read aloud by a deep, calm voice. She scrolled to the bottom and saw it. Submitted anonymously, verified by third-party analysts. Candace stared, wide-eyed. She remembered. Weeks ago, Unsure if she could trust anyone, she had copied all the documents onto a flash drive and sent them to a young journalist named Said, a cousin of one of her old classmates, just in case. And Said had done her job. By evening, the story was everywhere, on WhatsApp groups, Twitter, Instagram stories. It was on radio stations. People were calling into shows, shouting in Yoruba and Pidgin about how big men they thief and know they fear God. The next morning, EFCC officers arrived at Caroline's mansion. Neighbors watched as she was led out in slippers and wrapper, no makeup, shouting about lies and jealousy. Tolu was picked up in Lekki. Raymond tried to fly out to Ghana, but was stopped at the airport. Candace sat in her flat, watching it all unfold on TV. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing, but she didn't pick up. She just sat there, in silence, holding her father's journal to her chest, her eyes closed. The world now knew the truth. They called her bitter. They said she was crazy. But in the end, the lioness roared, and they heard her. The sky was clear that morning as Candace walked into the courtroom for the last time. No rain, no thunder, just sunlight, calm and quiet. The same doors she'd walked through with fear and shame weeks ago now opened in front of her like they were waiting for her. People turned to look, but this time it wasn't with judgment or mockery. It was respect. She wore a simple but powerful outfit, a black iro and buba her mother once wore, freshly ironed. Her hair was tied back neatly. Her steps were slow, firm and steady. No longer the girl pushed aside. No longer the daughter they tried to erase. The judge entered. The room stood, then sat. After reviewing the new evidence submitted to the court, the judge began, his voice clear and strong. And following the investigation by the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, this court finds that the assets of the Moore estate were subject to fraudulent activity. He paused, glancing over his glasses. The rightful heir to the shares, estate and legacy of the late Chief Edwin Moore is Miss Candace Moore. Gasps echoed softly around the courtroom. Candace didn't cry. She didn't cheer. She just placed her hand gently over her chest, as if she was calming her heart. She looked straight ahead, her face unreadable, but her eyes were full. The court granted her full control of her father's company shares, properties, and businesses. The same ones Caroline had tried to steal, the same ones her brothers laughed about. But the money wasn't what moved Candace the most. It was the truth. Her name was now clear. Her father's voice, once silenced, had finally been heard. Outside the courtroom, journalists waited, microphones in hand. One of them shouted, "Candace, what will you do with all of it?" She paused, then said simply, "I will do what my father should have done long ago, help people." And she meant it. In the months that followed, Candace sold one of the smaller estates in Banana Island and used the money to create the Chief Edwin Moore Public Health Scholarship, a fund for nursing and medical students from poor homes, especially young women who, like her, had been pushed aside too many times. Applications flooded in. Messages poured into her email. Stories from girls in Abeokuta, Zaria, Makurdi, girls who had big dreams but no support, girls who just needed one door to open. Candace opened that door. She also made quiet changes in her father's company. She replaced board members tied to corruption. She hired ethical managers. She funded a community health centre in Surulere, the same area her mother once volunteered in. She kept her promises, but she didn't seek the spotlight. She moved quietly, respectfully, letting her actions speak. Some still talked behind her back. Some still called her names. She didn't care. One Saturday, months after the final court hearing, Candace stood at her father's grave. The sun was setting, painting the sky in deep gold and red. She wore plain ankara, no makeup. In her hand, she held a small flower, her mother's favourite, hibiscus. She bent down and placed it on the headstone. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice soft and full of emotion. "You saw me, even when I didn't know. You believed in me in your own quiet way." She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the breeze touch her face. "I forgive you, and I'll carry the name with honour." She stood up, brushed her skirt, and walked away slowly, peacefully. As she reached the car, her phone buzzed. Another email, another scholarship applicant, another life about to change. Candace smiled. This was just the beginning. The sun was soft that afternoon, casting long golden shadows across the quiet park in Ikoyi. The breeze carried the smell of roasted groundnuts and distant laughter. Candace sat alone on a wooden bench beneath a wide almond tree, her back straight, her hands resting calmly in her lap. Children ran across the grass in front of her, barefoot, joyful, shouting in a mix of Yoruba and English. Their laughter was wild and honest, the kind she never really knew as a child. No pressure, no expectations, just freedom. She watched them with a small smile, her eyes following a little girl who was spinning in circles, arms wide open like she was catching the wind. Candace reached for the thin silver chain around her neck. Hanging from it was the old brass key, the same one her father left her in the will. It looked ordinary to anyone else, but to her, it was everything. That key had opened more than a storage unit. It had opened the truth, it had opened her past, and it had unlocked her future. She held it between her fingers, letting it dangle gently as the breeze played with her scarf. It wasn't just a symbol of what she had lost. It was proof of what she had survived, what she had claimed back with her own two hands. There was no more court to fight, no more lies to untangle, no more name to clear. Now, there was just her, a woman who walked through fire and came out with her head high. She thought of her mother, of her father, of the quiet strength she carried through all the years she was forgotten, pushed aside, made small. Now she was not small. She was not bitter. She was not broken. A boy ran past her, laughing loudly, holding a plastic toy airplane in his hand. For a second, she imagined her younger self running beside him, barefoot, smiling, free. She closed her eyes, let the wind kiss her skin, let the peace settle in her bones. And when she opened her eyes again, she was still smiling. Not the polite smile she had learned to wear for survival, but a real one, a full one, a free one. Hi besties, thank you so much for watching to the end. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Bye.